Today's story makes reference to a subject which some people might find disturbing. The story is not descriptive or graphic about the incident, but makes reference to it. Stories are a means by which we hold ourselves accountable. My name is Osadumebi, and every week I will tell you a short story written by a Nigerian writer or author. That's the long and short of it. So without much ado, this week's story is by Nse Obot, and it's titled Old Enough. Olaoluwa College, Okieson, had zero tolerance for any form of teacher-student relationship which didn't have to do with academics. The principal, Mr. Akinlabi, would not tolerate any kind of entanglement among his staff, let alone an affair between a teacher and a student. The scandal behind Mr. Taiwo's dismissal still reverberated around the school. Teachers had become hyper-vigilant and were extremely diligent in keeping their conversations with and behavior towards students strictly professional, lest they followed the same path as the disgraced maths teacher. Mr. Bolaji had just been employed as the new maths teacher. His colleagues wasted no time in filling him in. Embellished or not, the sordid details of his predecessor's exit left Mr. Bolaji wondering why any responsible adult would choose to get romantically involved with a minor. Well, he came here to eke out a living from the pittance which would be his salary, not to have romances with little girls who could hardly clean up after themselves. It was the first week of term. Only students from the junior secondary classes had resumed. As was the norm, the seniors stayed back for a week or two before they started trooping in. Week 1 was as uneventful as expected, just a general clean-up. With week 2 came the influx of the big boys and girls, in well-ironed shirts and trousers for the boys, and blouses and skirts for the girls. Skirts which didn't quite make it to the knees. At first glance, they looked like adults in school uniforms. It now made sense. The fate of the former maths teacher. Mr. Bolaji made a vow to himself. He would exhibit the highest level of professionalism at Olaoluwa College. Mondays came with an air of seriousness. Perhaps that was why maths was slated for the first 2 periods in SS2. SS2, the same class where Mr. Taiwo couldn't resist teaching more than maths. The hum and buzz of noise from students didn't subside even after Mr. Bolaji walked into the class. A few noticed his presence but did little or nothing to pay him the respect due a teacher. 80 minutes later, Mr. Bolaji had won their hearts with his engaging teaching style. It seemed maths was reintroduced to the students. For the first time since forever, they looked forward to maths class. Mr. Taiwo was great at maths. He just wasn't big on teaching the subject. The students loathed his teaching and were relieved to hear the scandal which led to his dismissal. Tayo had long suspected something was up between his crush Aduni and Mr. Taiwo, but he had no evidence. Until the day, watching and dissecting their every move as he had become obsessed with doing, he saw it. The quickest glance, the smile in her eyes, his broadened shoulder. He was sure something was going down. He would stay back in school to see the end of the matter. 4:15 p.m. No teacher or student was anywhere near the classroom block. Just Mr. Taiwo and Aduni having a private biology practical class. Tayo felt smug as he pulled out his phone and started recording. He didn't give a hoot about Mr. Taiwo. As for Aduni, served her right for rejecting his advances. The video was going straight to the principal. Mr. Taiwo's termination, as well as his subsequent arrest, was proof the video arrived its destination. Aduni's parents came to pick her up. She never returned to school. Mr. Bolaji had settled into his new job and was getting used to life in the remote town of Okieson. He loved teaching, and the rapt attention from his students motivated him even more. He spent his evenings refining his lessons, thinking of ways to demystify what was rarely a favorite subject in schools. His students accosted him at every opportunity, asking for one explanation or the other, and he provided as much additional resources as he could to facilitate their learning. What he hadn't paid attention to was who the questions were coming from. Not until the looks and whispers in the staff room began. Rumor had it that some SS2 girls had upped the ante in their quest to be noticed by a certain maths teacher, whose youth and charm had more to do with their renewed interest in the subject than a genuine desire to learn. Mr. Bolaji remembered his vow, and he became even more vigilant. Then came the first midterm test, and as was expected, it wasn't everyone who liked a particular subject who performed well in that subject. As a matter of fact, the ones who passed performed below expectation. One script stood out, 20 out of 20, like a solitary firefly illuminating the forest. The student, Anuoluwa Adekemi Koka. He was impressed. Students like her made teaching rewarding. He decided to personally hand out the marked scripts so he could put a face to the name. Midterm holiday came with the promise of rest for Mr. Bolaji, and he planned to maximize every second of it. As a pastime, he liked going for walks. He needed to get in some sightseeing since his job never afforded him the time. It was in the course of his lazy saunter he saw her, Anu. He almost didn't recognize her. She looked different without her uniform. What a natural beauty, unassuming and effortless. He caught himself and slammed the brakes on his train of thought. Too late. The image was seared in his mind. "Good afternoon, sir." Her voice pulled him out of his mental train wreck. He made the encounter as brief as possible. Teaching was one hell of a profession. As days melted into weeks and weeks months, Mr. Bolaji found his like for Anu growing. It shouldn't be happening, but it was. No day passed without him mouthing over and over the "lead me not into temptation" line of the Lord's Prayer. Was this how it started with Mr. Taiwo and Aduni? Mr. Bolaji thought. Fear kept him in check, afraid to lose the good reputation he had built. At Olaoluwa, walls didn't just have ears. They had eyes which didn't miss a thing. What a colossal embarrassment it would be if any of his actions, misconstrued or real, resulted in him being called a pedophile. Ọlọ́run má jẹ́, he shrugged as often as he mouthed, "Lead me not into temptation." Anu was no stranger to the rule which loomed over teachers and students like Olumorok. She hadn't suspected a thing between Aduni and Mr. Taiwo. She had felt sorry for Aduni when the news broke. She didn't get the opportunity to speak with her math study partner, let alone say goodbye. With the SSCE exams a year away, she had been worried about who would replace Mr. Taiwo. She was relieved after Mr. Bolaji's first double period with her class. Maths was her favorite subject, and she was working towards an A1 next year. Speaking of Mr. Bolaji, she noticed he had been acting strangely of late. She couldn't put a finger on it, but she was convinced he was no longer himself. She liked him. He was good for her A1 goal. She hoped he would stick around for at least a year. She became worried when there was no sign of Mr. Bolaji for their double period maths class one Monday morning. He never missed school. She would have assumed he was off sick or had a family emergency, but the principal and the teachers in his staff room seemed as puzzled as everyone else. Double period maths on Wednesday came and went. There was a substitute teacher, and it was dreadful. Single period maths on Friday, and still no sign of Mr. Bolaji. Whispers in the staff room indicated his belongings had been cleared out of his apartment, and his phone was unreachable. Nse is a writer who resides in Lagos. You can read more of his work on Zion Tales, that's Zion spelled ZYONTALES, ziontales.wordpress.com. If you've got a story you would like to be featured on this podcast, or a published book you want to make into an audiobook, send me a DM on Facebook or Instagram at Osadimibi. I look forward to collaborating with you. And if you've enjoyed this week's episode, tell a friend that stories are a good escape for a few minutes each week.